In the past, I have made a lot of big things, like all of these. But truly, it's just me compensating for a small YouTube channel. But today, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be making small things because of, well, this comment right here. I'm going to make 3 small things. First, it's going to be a small sword, then small nunchucks, and then a surprise. I'm not going to show you what the last thing is. You're going to have to watch till the end to find out. Oh, and also one more thing before we get started. I'm going to make everything with only scraps. I don't want to go buy heaps of new materials and have even more scrap lying around, because I have quite a bit of offcuts from previous projects. The first thing we're making is a small katana. I just want to turn this thing into this. This is called a tanto. A tanto is a knife from Japan. It pretty much looks like a small katana, but I want my small katana to look more like this thing. So to start with, I went and got this scrap piece of metal from this project right here. This is a folding knife I made. Anyway, cutting it out didn't take long at all. I just had to sand it down to the correct shape and put it aside while we make the handle. The handle is going to be made out of pine wood because I had this big chunk of wood left over from my resin axe I made. I'm going to cut the wood into 3 pieces. 2 pieces for the handle and 1 piece for the crossguard. But before we could shape the handle, we had to carve out enough room for the tang to sit. The tang is the bottom bit of the blade that doesn't get sharpened. I just used a hammer and chisel and slowly chipped away until I had the right shape and it fit like a glove. Once carving a hole in the wood was done, I went and cut the second piece of the handle out and started sanding the shape of the handle so it could actually fit my hand. I just used a sanding disc just like before, slowly carving it away until it fit perfectly in my hand. Now I purposely kept the handle the same width as a normal sword, so then it would fit in my hand nice and neat and it wouldn't be finicky to hold. Now since everything is scrap, that includes the bolt I'm going to use to connect the blade to the handle. Normally a bolt isn't used, but I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm just going to use a bolt. I had 1 bolt left over, Now this bolt had a few problems, but before we get into them, I was very lucky with how long the bolt was. It was actually the perfect length. Problems lay with the fact I wanted to make the handle smooth. To do that, I would have just drilled a little hole for the bolt head and the nut to sit in. But the bolt head was way too thick and I didn't have a drill piece big enough, and the nut itself was actually square, so drilling a circle hole wouldn't fix that problem. To fix this problem, I went and got my chisel again and chiseled out the correct shape. But I kid you not, I filmed it and the footage is gone. Still one more problem with the handle, and that is the blade has wiggle room, so it can wiggle side to side. This is no problem though, as I just went and grabbed a scrap piece of metal from my suit of armor I made and cut a little rectangle. After drilling a hole in it, it fit perfectly and it solved my problem. Only 2 things left to do. 1 is sharpen it and 2 is make the crossguard. First we're going to sharpen the knife. To do this, I went and got my grinder, switched from a cutting disc to a sanding disc. Now you may notice this sanding disc is covered in sawdust. The sawdust shouldn't really have an effect on the sharpening, so we just went straight to it. When it came to sharpening it, we had to make sure we sharpened both sides of the blade as evenly as possible, as you don't want to have it crooked. It would look really stupid and it would ruin the project. Before we can move on to the crossguard, I just had to cover the metal in a coating that would prevent it from rusting. So I just used this clear coat primer because I had that on hand, gave it 1 coat on each side, left it to dry, and it also changed the color of the blade. It changed it ever so slightly, making it darker and a little bit shiny, which I quite liked. Okay, now time for the crossguard. To make the crossguard, we went and got that last scrap piece of wood and started cutting into it. We chucked it in the vise, started cutting a very thin piece as the crossguard isn't going to be very thick. Last time I made a crossguard, I crushed it in the vise. To prevent myself from doing that mistake again, I left a little bit of extra wood on the end we would cut off later. And after cutting out everything, I realized the crossguard was bad. I made it rectangular because I didn't know how to cut any other shape with the tools I had, and it looked horrible, so I decided to chuck it. It was time to combine the knife all together. First of all, here's all the pieces laid out. When putting it together, it was super easy as there was only 1 bolt that needed to be put in place. To make the handle even stronger and hopefully prevent the handle from spinning, I added PVA. Right, and here is the knife. It turns out really well. I like it. I think it looks pretty cool. It looks a little goofy, but I was kind of expecting that. Anyway, it's not done yet because we still need to test the sharpness. Now obviously it's a knife, it is sharp. But let's see how it compares against 2 things. Number 1 is a factory made knife, which is my karambit. which is this thing. And 2 is going to be my last project, which was a Lego katana. And we're going to test to see which one is the strongest? Which one is the sharpest? Wait, no, we're not testing which one's the sharpest. We're testing if the knife is sharp. Alright, anyway, let's get to the test. To test the sharpness, we have got this pool noodle. We're going to cut into it, and just to see that you can cut. First is the ceramic knife. It cut it great. Obviously, it is a knife bought from the shops. It is going to cut. Second is my katana. Homemade katana. It cut great. It's a sword. What else do you expect? It's going to cut. But last is the knife I made. It didn't cut as nice as I'd hoped. Unfortunately, it is not as sharp as I'd hoped. But it still cut it great, and after getting it going, it did cut. I noticed there was one little piece on the blade that wasn't quite sharpened properly, and unfortunately it's right in the middle, which is really annoying. The next thing I want to make is small nunchucks. Now there are 2 ways of doing this. I could, one, make the handles really thin, or make them really short. And well, making them really short, I thought they'd be unusable, so I decided to go with really thin. Now for using scraps, I'm going to use this pipe. I've never actually used this pipe in anything, but I bought it in hopes to use it on my giant butterfly knife. I was going to use it at the end, but instead I ended up using hundreds of washers. Although I never used the metal, I still bought it, so I'm counting it as scraps. It's been sitting in my room for months, so I really just want to get rid of it. I just had to cut 2 handles and drill 2 holes. The only problem really was I was afraid I was going to snap the drill piece because the handles are circular and metal, but I didn't, and after doing that, it was time to put it all together. To put it all together, I grabbed a bit of wire, cut it to the correct size, put it in between the holes, and then attached a bit of rope. And there we go, now we have nunchucks. But let's see if I can use them. When it came to using the nunchucks, they were pretty much the exact same. The only difficult part was, at first I made the rope a little bit too long, but after I compared it to a normal nunchuck, I just fixed that problem. When spinning it, it wasn't too hard. Catching it was a little bit difficult as there was less to grab. It was also lighter, so you could spin it faster, and it made a really nice noise. Honestly, it's super fun, and I'm definitely going to use it more. After building those last 2 things, I started to get a bit hungry. So I went into the kitchen to go get some food, and I realized we were out of cutlery. So I had to solve this problem. Once again, using leftover metal from my armor, I drew out the shapes I wanted to cut and went to cutting. First I went to cut the spear, which was super easy. I just had to cut off excess pieces of metal and put it aside because we'll connect it to the handle later. Then we moved on to the axe. I tried to make the axe look as similar to an axe I made a couple months back. Now this is where we ran into the worst thing that has ever happened when making something. Normally when I'm cutting metal, I clamp it to the table and cut it with my grinder. The grinding discs I normally use are quite strong, but unfortunately the shops didn't have the ones I normally use, so I grabbed a different brand. That could have really hurt me. Here's what the metal looked like after being flung into a wall. Now stupidly, I didn't switch the disc. So initially I just put the metal on the table and went to cut, and it was cutting really straight. This is what the blade looked like, and this is what it's meant to look like. What it looks like, what it meant to look like. So I went and found the brand of disc I normally use, I clamped it to the table, and finished off the cutting job. Once cutting out the axe was done, I then quickly sharpened it, and it was time to move on to the handles. Technically, this is not scrap wood, as this wood originally was an arrow from this project. But I haven't used the bow and arrow in months, so I decided I'm going to repurpose the arrow. Quickly cut 2 pieces for the handle, and then went to bend the metal. Immediately forgetting how I made the practice version, I had to figure out how to connect it to the wood again. I started off by bending the metal on the edge of the table. I wanted to move to the hammer, but I couldn't quite figure out how to do it. It just wasn't at the correct angle. After messing around for a little while, I ended up banging my fingers with the hammer, and then I had a brilliant idea. I'm just going to squish it in the vise. By using the vise, it sandwiched the metal together, squishing the wood in place and making it unable to move. And it was time to do it on the spear. I did the same thing, but then realized I didn't cut it great and it looked really, really bad. So I quickly cut off some excess pieces and tried to fix it. It still looks really, really bad, but it will do. I went back to the kitchen, ready to cook up a feast, pulled open the drawer, took my tools out, started cutting up some sausage, turned the stove on, and cooked them. They also second as cutlery after making the food, and I got to enjoy a nice meal outside. Now if you actually want to see me make something good, go watch one of my other videos. Thanks for watching.